Rome's earliest period begins in the mid-8th century BC, centered on the Palatine Hill in the central Italian peninsula. Archaeological evidence indicates the presence of small settlements by the mid-8th century BC, consisting of simple huts constructed from wattle and daub and organized around communal enclosures. Excavations reveal rudimentary fortifications, pottery fragments, and traces of agricultural activity, demonstrating that the earliest inhabitants of this area relied on mixed subsistence farming, including the cultivation of cereals, legumes, and the domestication of livestock, such as goats, sheep, and cattle. Evidence from surrounding hills, including the Capitoline and Aventine, indicates that these communities were not isolated but part of a network of settlements connected through trade, communication, and defensive coordination. The first historically recorded political structure of Rome was monarchical, though much of the traditional narrative relies on later Roman historians such as Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus. Archaeology supports the existence of increasingly complex social organization by the late 8th century BC, which would have required leadership figures to coordinate communal activities, manage resources, and defend the settlement. Historians record a series of 7 kings ruling Rome before the establishment of the Republic, though contemporary documentation for each individual is limited. The last 3 kings, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus, have the most evidence in terms of institutional developments, even though exact chronologies are debated. The earliest king with some verifiable impact on Roman institutions is Servius Tullius, who is thought to have reigned in the late 6th century BC. Archaeological data indicate that during this period, Rome began significant urban development, including construction of permanent defensive structures such as the earliest forms of the Servian Wall, which encircled the Palatine, Capitoline, and surrounding hills. The construction methods suggest both local stonework and the use of tufa blocks, demonstrating the capability for coordinated, large-scale public works. The existence of fortifications indicates that Rome faced external threats, likely from neighboring Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan communities, which were documented to occupy central Italy and dominate trade routes to the Tyrrhenian Sea. Servius Tullius is also associated with military and social organization reforms. Archaeological and numismatic evidence from the period indicates the emergence of structured urban planning, census activity, and delineation of social and property classes. The Romans divided citizens into centuries and tribes for military and voting purposes, which would allow the mobilization of manpower based on wealth, social status, and capacity to equip soldiers. This system suggests that Rome had developed enough population density and economic stratification to require formalized civic administration. The reforms created a framework that enabled both political representation in the Senate and military service in the early Roman army, laying the groundwork for the organizational structures of the later Republic. In addition to social stratification, Rome developed early religious and civic institutions. Excavations and inscriptions indicate the presence of small sanctuaries and altars, some dedicated to deities that later became central to Roman religion. These include ritualized offerings, both agricultural and animal, suggesting that civic, religious, and agricultural life were closely integrated. The Senate, initially an advisory body to the king, appears to have evolved from councils of elder males drawn from leading families of the settlement. These councils likely regulated communal resources, oversaw legal disputes, and provided continuity in governance during transitions of power. By the late 6th century BC, the Senate seems to have exercised significant influence in decision-making, especially regarding military matters and urban administration. Rome's population during this period is difficult to quantify with precision, but archaeological density, housing patterns, and early cemetery evidence suggest a population ranging from several thousand to perhaps 10,000 individuals inhabiting the Palatine Hill and adjacent areas. The economy was predominantly agrarian, supplemented by trade with nearby Etruscan cities such as Veii, as indicated by imported pottery and metalwork. There is evidence of early metalworking, including iron and bronze implements, suggesting that Rome participated in regional technological networks and had access to necessary resources for agricultural and military purposes. The monarchical period also saw Rome establish legal and political precedents that influenced subsequent republican governance. Although the written record from the 8th and 7th centuries BC is sparse, inscriptions and fragments of early Latin texts imply that Rome developed customary laws to govern property disputes, inheritance, and contractual obligations. These early codifications reflect a society seeking stability through institutionalization rather than reliance on ad hoc resolution. The king exercised executive authority, but his decisions were mediated by the Senate and assemblies of male citizens, reflecting an emerging balance between individual power and communal oversight. External relations during the monarchy shaped Rome's development significantly. Archaeological evidence indicates Rome engaged in both conflict and diplomacy with neighboring communities. The Sabines, Latins, and Etruscans were the principal regional powers, and evidence of fortifications, weaponry, and trade goods suggests that Rome had to navigate both warfare and alliance formation to survive. By the late 6th century BC, Rome appears to have extended influence over nearby villages, incorporating them into early municipal structures and laying the foundation for broader territorial control. The monarchy concluded in 509 BC with the overthrow of Tarquin the Proud, Tarquinius Superbus. Contemporary accounts, corroborated by later historians, indicate that the expulsion was not merely a response to individual tyranny, but reflected a broader institutional shift. The elite families of Rome sought to limit monarchical power and establish a system where executive authority would be shared and checked by civic institutions. Following the expulsion, Rome abolished the kingship and instituted the republic, replacing the singular authority of the king with elected consuls and a strengthened Senate. This transition represents one of the earliest recorded instances of a society moving from hereditary monarchy to representative governance in the Mediterranean world. The end of the monarchy marks a period in which Rome's early political, military, and social structures, developed over more than 2 centuries, would directly influence its republican evolution. The organizational principles introduced under the kings, particularly Servius Tullius, provided a durable framework for citizenship, military mobilization, and civic participation. These institutions enabled Rome to expand beyond its initial hilltop settlement into the surrounding Latin territories, setting the stage for the complex conflicts and alliances that defined the early republic. The establishment of the Roman Republic in 509 BC marked a fundamental shift in the governance of the city. With the expulsion of Tarquin the Proud, Rome replaced monarchical rule with a system of dual consuls, elected annually, who exercised executive authority jointly. This structure aimed to prevent the concentration of power in a single individual. Consuls commanded the army, presided over the Senate, and oversaw civic administration, while ultimate authority rested collectively with the Senate, composed of patricians, and, increasingly, with assemblies of citizens, particularly the comitia centuriata and comitia tributa. The early republic institutionalized checks and balances, creating a framework that combined aristocratic control with limited participation from the broader citizenry. Rome's population during the early Republican period likely numbered between 25,000 and 40,000 inhabitants within the city itself, with surrounding Latin and Sabine territories adding further population. Archaeological evidence suggests that Rome's urban footprint expanded modestly from the Palatine Hill to include adjacent hills and valleys, incorporating fortifications, roads, and communal spaces. Domestic architecture remained primarily single-room dwellings built from wood and mud brick, but larger communal structures and early temples indicate the emergence of civic and religious infrastructure integrated with governance. One of the earliest legal codifications in the Republic was the Law of the 12 Tables, enacted approximately 450 BC. While the original texts survive only in fragments, later Roman historians and legal commentators confirmed that the 12 Tables codified civil, criminal, and procedural law. They addressed issues such as property rights, inheritance, debt, family obligations, and contractual agreements, providing transparency and consistency in legal proceedings. The creation of written law reflected a demand from the plebeian class, who sought protection from arbitrary judgment by patrician magistrates. This legal foundation became a cornerstone of Roman jurisprudence and influenced subsequent reforms in both the Republican and Imperial periods. During the early Republic, Rome faced continuous pressure from neighboring communities. Conflicts with the Etruscans, including the powerful city of Veii, and ongoing skirmishes with the Sabines and Latins, required the development of a structured military system. Rome organized its citizen soldiers into centuries based on wealth and ability to provide equipment. The velites, light infantry, were drawn from the poorer classes, while wealthier citizens served as heavy infantry, the hastati, principes, and triarii. Military service was tied to citizenship, reinforcing civic responsibility and social cohesion. Campaigns during this period were both defensive and expansionist, allowing Rome to gradually consolidate control over central Italy. The early Republic also experienced internal social transformation through the conflict of the orders. This was a prolonged struggle between patricians, the aristocratic elite, and plebeians, the broader citizen population, over political representation and legal rights. Key milestones included the creation of the office of the tribune of the plebs in 494 BC, a magistrate empowered to protect plebeian interests, including the right to veto senatorial decisions. Other reforms included the establishment of plebeian assemblies and gradual access to the consulship and other magistracies. The conflict, which spanned much of the 5th and 4th centuries BC, resulted in institutional innovations that shaped the balance of power within the Republic and enhanced civic participation while maintaining aristocratic influence. Rome's territorial expansion during this period was methodical and incremental. The Latin League, a coalition of Latin cities, was initially a source of alliance and tension. Rome engaged in periodic wars with the Latins, culminating in the Latin War, 340 to 338 BC, after which Rome extended citizenship to defeated communities and incorporated them into a network of colonies and alliances. Similarly, Rome's engagement with the Etruscans was characterized by intermittent conflict and conquest, exemplified by the protracted siege of Veii, c. 405 to 396 BC, resulting in Rome's capture of the city and its integration into Roman political and military structures. The conquest of Veii provided Rome with access to fertile lands, mineral resources, and strategic control over the Tiber River Valley, reinforcing its regional power. During the 4th century BC, Rome also confronted the Samnites, a tribal confederation in the Apennine region. The Samnite Wars, 343 to 290 BC, fought in 3 separate campaigns, were characterized by prolonged engagements in difficult terrain and required tactical adaptation, including the development of manipular formations that replaced the earlier phalanx. These reforms allowed greater flexibility and resilience in Roman military operations, establishing methods that would persist through the Republican and Imperial periods. The wars concluded with Roman dominance over the Italian peninsula south of the Tiber, integrating previously autonomous communities through alliances, colonies, and strategic settlements. The early republic also developed sophisticated administrative structures to manage its growing territory. Rome established a census, conducted approximately every 5 years, to register citizens for taxation, military service, and political participation. The census classified citizens according to wealth and property, reinforcing social stratification while providing the state with data for recruitment and resource allocation. Colonies were founded in conquered territories, both to secure strategic locations and to distribute land to Roman citizens, particularly veterans and poorer citizens. These colonies extended Roman influence, facilitated cultural integration, and ensured control over critical trade and communication routes. Economically, Rome in the early Republic relied primarily on agriculture, supplemented by trade and resource extraction. Crops included wheat, barley, olives, and grapes, with olive oil and wine becoming significant products. Livestock provided meat, dairy, and leather. Archaeological findings indicate that Roman artisans engaged in metalworking, pottery, and textile production. Trade networks extended to Etruscan, Greek, and Latin neighbors, allowing access to goods such as pottery, bronze implements, and luxury items. The economic base of Rome enabled sustained military campaigns, construction of fortifications and roads, and expansion of civic institutions. Religious and cultural institutions played a central role in consolidating civic identity. Temples, altars, and ritual sites were integrated into public spaces, with religious officials participating in governance. Augury and divination guided military and political decisions, providing a framework for communal decision-making and conflict resolution. Festivals and public ceremonies reinforced social cohesion, linking political authority with religious legitimacy. Inscriptions and later records indicate that many of these institutions persisted and were formalized in later Republican and Imperial practice, demonstrating continuity in civic religious structures. By the late 3rd century BC, the early Republic had established a cohesive civic, military, and legal system capable of sustained regional dominance. Rome's combination of flexible governance, disciplined citizen soldiers, legal codification, territorial integration, and administrative organization allowed it to absorb conquered populations, maintain social order, and project power beyond its initial urban settlement. The Republic's institutions, Senate, assemblies, magistracies, and military structures provided the foundation for the subsequent phases of Roman expansion and the complex political military system that enabled the city to dominate the Italian peninsula and prepare for overseas conflict. By the mid-3rd century BC, Rome had established dominance over central Italy through incremental military campaigns and political alliances. The early republic had integrated conquered Latin, Etruscan, and Samnite territories, extended Roman citizenship to allied communities, and developed a disciplined citizen-soldier army organized into manipular formations. This consolidation provided the foundation for Rome's first major engagements beyond the Italian peninsula, initiating what became known as the Punic Wars, a series of conflicts with the North African city-state of Carthage. The expansionist policy of the early republic, based on strategic colonies, military organization, and economic integration, positioned Rome to confront established Mediterranean powers and secure maritime trade networks. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC, arose from disputes over control of Sicily, particularly the city of Messana. Contemporary records indicate that Rome intervened in Sicilian affairs to protect an allied contingent and prevent Carthaginian dominance over strategic grain-producing regions. Carthage, already an established naval and commercial power in the Western Mediterranean, responded militarily. The war lasted 23 years, characterized by the development of Rome's first substantial navy, the construction of quinquiremes, and the implementation of naval tactics adapted from Carthaginian designs. Ancient sources, including Polybius, document that Rome mobilized up to 350 ships and over 100,000 troops throughout the conflict, reflecting unprecedented logistical capacity for the Republic. The war included significant engagements such as the Battle of Mylae, 260 BC, and the Battle of Ecnomus, 256 BC, in which Roman naval forces employed the corvus boarding device to leverage infantry skills in maritime combat. These innovations allowed Rome to offset Carthage's experienced sailors and gain tactical advantages. By 241 BC, after a decisive campaign and blockade of Carthaginian forces, Rome secured control over Sicily, which became its first province outside the Italian mainland. The war imposed substantial financial burdens, with Rome instituting tributes on Sicily and expanding taxation and resource mobilization systems to support provincial administration. Sicily's population, estimated at several 100,000 at the time, was gradually integrated into Rome's economic and political structure, including tribute collection, local magistrates, and oversight by Roman officials. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, arose after continued Roman expansion into southern Italy and Spain, threatening Carthaginian interests. Carthage deployed Hannibal Barca, who executed a coordinated invasion of the Italian peninsula via the Alps, documented in Polybius and Livy with precise logistical details. Hannibal's army, including approximately 30,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, crossed treacherous terrain, suffering significant losses but retaining combat effectiveness. Hannibal's victories at Trebia, 218 BC, Lake Trasimene, 217 BC, and Cannae, 216 BC, inflicted catastrophic casualties on Roman forces, reportedly up to 50,000 soldiers in a single engagement at Cannae. Despite repeated defeats, Rome maintained strategic resilience through continuous recruitment of citizen soldiers and adaptation of military strategies. Roman armies, numbering up to 80,000 in combined forces during critical campaigns, avoided direct engagement when disadvantageous and implemented attritional tactics. Key commanders such as Fabius Maximus Cunctator employed delaying strategies to preserve manpower and harass Hannibal's supply lines, demonstrating early operational flexibility. Rome's alliances with Italian allies, Sicily, and Macedonia ensured logistical support, manpower replenishment, and access to regional resources. The turning point of the Second Punic War occurred under Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, who conducted operations in Spain, neutralizing Carthaginian bases, and then advanced into North Africa. The decisive engagement at Zama in 202 BC resulted in Carthage's defeat, confirmed by Roman records, including Polybius and inscriptions celebrating Scipio's triumph. Carthage was compelled to cede territories in Spain, reduce its navy to 50 ships, and pay reparations totaling approximately 10,000 talents of silver over 50 years. The war solidified Rome's influence in the Western Mediterranean and established a model for the integration of provinces and management of conquered territories. Following the Second Punic War, Rome consolidated power in Spain and North Africa. The establishment of provinces such as Hispania Superior and Hispania Ulterior involved assigning praetors and proconsuls to govern, collect tribute, and command military forces. Colonies were founded at strategic locations, including Tarraco and Carthago Nova, to secure communication routes, control rebellious populations, and facilitate resource extraction. Economic data from inscriptions and coinage indicate that these provinces contributed significantly to Rome's fiscal base, including grain, olive oil, and silver mines, thereby financing further military and administrative expansion. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC, concluded the Punic conflicts and eliminated Carthage as a competitor. Provoked by ongoing territorial disputes and Carthaginian resistance to Roman oversight, Rome declared war, mobilizing approximately 80,000 troops, including both Roman legions and allied contingents. The siege of Carthage lasted 3 years, with extensive fortifications, trench works, and coordinated assaults documented in Roman military annals. In 146 BC, Roman forces breached the city, systematically destroying structures, executing remaining defenders, and selling survivors into slavery. Carthage's destruction secured unchallenged Roman dominance over the Western Mediterranean and demonstrated Rome's capacity for sustained siege warfare and coordinated provincial integration. During and following the Punic Wars, Rome extended its influence into the Eastern Mediterranean, initially through diplomatic contacts and subsequently through military intervention. The Macedonian Wars, 214 to 148 BC, were contemporaneous with the Punic conflicts, reflecting Rome's broader strategic interests. Rome imposed tributary arrangements on Greek city-states, reorganized regional governance, and secured key trade routes through the Aegean and Adriatic seas. Roman legions stationed in newly acquired territories enforced political and fiscal compliance, while local elites were incorporated into client networks to maintain stability. This expansion allowed Rome to control both land and maritime routes critical for commerce, resource movement, and military logistics. Internally, the period of Mediterranean expansion reinforced social hierarchies, military organization, and economic networks. The citizen-soldier system required continuous recruitment, leading to pressure on smaller landholders and the emergence of military elites. Wealth accumulation through war spoils and provincial taxation contributed to disparities between the aristocratic patricians and other classes. Legal and administrative structures evolved to manage conquered populations, including formalized provincial governance, taxation systems, and codification of military command. Rome's capacity to integrate diverse populations and maintain logistical supply lines over long distances became a defining feature of its imperial structure. The Punic Wars also accelerated developments in naval technology, logistics, and siegecraft. Rome's first large-scale navy, initially constructed during the First Punic War, evolved into a permanent institution, capable of deploying fleets of up to 400 ships simultaneously. Naval engineering, crew training, and coordination with land forces created a template for subsequent Mediterranean operations. Siege techniques, including circumvallation, battering rams, and coordinated assaults, became standard practice for Roman commanders, reflecting institutional learning and adaptation. Inscriptions and archaeological remains, including fortifications and shipwrecks, provide material confirmation of these technological and operational advancements. By the end of the Third Punic War in 146 BC, Rome had transitioned from a regional power to a dominant force in the Western Mediterranean, controlling Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, Hispania, and North Africa, while extending influence into the Eastern Mediterranean. This period marked the beginning of Rome's provincial system, which included taxation, military oversight, urban colonization, and integration of local elites. The Republic's institutional framework, legions, consular command, Senate oversight, and assemblies proved capable of managing extended territories, providing the structural basis for subsequent conflicts, including internal political crises and expansion into the Greek world. By the mid-2nd century BC, Rome had emerged from the Punic Wars as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. The destruction of Carthage in 146 BC and the conclusion of the Macedonian Wars placed Rome in direct control or influence over vast territories, including Hispania, North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and regions of Greece. This rapid expansion significantly altered the Republic's political, economic, and military structures. The provincial system, established during earlier conflicts, now encompassed larger populations and greater geographic distances, requiring enhanced administrative capacity. Provinces were governed by praetors, proconsuls, and legates, who exercised military and civil authority on behalf of the Senate, while Rome collected tribute and ensured loyalty through a combination of local elite incorporation and military presence. The expansion of Roman territory, however, created profound socioeconomic disparities. Wealth from war spoils, tribute, and control of agricultural lands was concentrated in the hands of a small elite of patricians and wealthy plebeians who acquired extensive estates known as latifundia. These large estates employed enslaved labor, often captured during campaigns in Hispania, Gaul, or the Eastern Mediterranean. Contemporary records estimate tens of thousands of enslaved individuals were brought into Italy during this period, altering the labor market and creating significant pressure on smallholders, who struggled to compete economically. The concentration of land ownership contributed to social tensions, necessitating legislative, and administrative interventions in subsequent decades. Political tensions escalated as the traditional republican structures struggled to manage these pressures. The Senate, dominated by wealthy families, maintained control over taxation, provincial assignments, and military command, while the assemblies of citizens retained formal legislative authority. Conflicts between the Senate and the tribunes of the plebs persisted, particularly over reforms addressing land distribution, debt relief, and the rights of newly enfranchised populations. Notable legislative efforts during this period included the Lex Sempronia Agraria, c. 133 BC, introduced by Tiberius Gracchus, which sought to redistribute public land to impoverished citizens. Subsequent reform attempts by Gaius Gracchus, 123 to 121 BC, expanded legal and social protections for citizens, including grain subsidies and judicial reforms. These legislative measures, recorded in contemporary accounts, were met with resistance from the Senate, leading to political confrontation and, in extreme cases, violence sanctioned by consular authority. The Roman military underwent a significant transformation in response to both external and internal pressures. Generals such as Gaius Marius, 157 to 86 BC, enacted reforms in the late 2nd century BC, standardizing the recruitment of soldiers from both landholding and landless citizens. This shift professionalized the legions, allowing soldiers to serve extended terms in exchange for pensions or land grants upon discharge. These reforms, recorded in the writings of Sallust and Plutarch, enhanced Rome's capacity to wage sustained campaigns in Hispania, Gaul, and the eastern provinces. Military service became increasingly tied to loyalty to individual commanders rather than solely to the state, a development with profound implications for the political structure of the late Republic. Rome's external military engagements during this period were extensive. In Hispania, campaigns continued intermittently from 181 BC to 133 BC, targeting resistant tribes such as the Celtiberians. Contemporary sources record that Roman forces numbered 20,000 to 30,000 soldiers during these operations, often encountering fortified settlements and complex terrain. In Gaul, Roman incursions established client relationships in colonies, securing trade routes and strategic passes. In the Eastern Mediterranean, Rome's involvement in Greek affairs included oversight of Macedonian territories following the defeat of Perseus of Macedon in 168 BC and intervention in the Achaean League culminating in the sack of Corinth in 146 BC, which cemented Roman authority in Greece. These campaigns required coordinated deployment of multiple legions, logistical support, and naval transport, illustrating the Republic's organizational capacity and the evolving role of provincial administration. The concentration of military power in the hands of prominent generals created conditions for political instability. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, 138 to 78 BC, after campaigns in the east and against domestic enemies, marched on Rome in 88 BC, initiating a precedent for military intervention in civil governance. Sulla's actions, including proscriptions and the appointment of loyalists to key magistracies, demonstrated the increasing influence of individual commanders over republican institutions. These developments undermined traditional checks and balances, contributing to the cycles of civil conflict that defined the late Republic. The Social War, 91 to 88 BC, further reshaped the Republic's political landscape. Italian allies, previously excluded from full citizenship despite obligations for military service, revolted to demand legal and political recognition. The conflict, involving Roman armies of over 100,000 soldiers on both sides, resulted in high casualties, but ultimately concluded with the Lex Julia, 90 BC, and subsequent legislation, granting Roman citizenship to most Italian communities. This integration expanded the citizen base, increased the pool of recruits for the legions, and reinforced administrative complexity, as provincial governance now encompassed both traditional Italian territories and extended provinces. The First Triumvirate, 60 to 53 BC, an informal political alliance between Julius Caesar, Pompey Magnus, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, illustrates the concentration of political and military power in individual hands during this period. Contemporary records, including letters and public decrees, document the coordinated use of patronage, electoral influence, and legislative initiatives to consolidate authority. Caesar's military command in Gaul, commencing in 58 BC, enabled Rome to secure territories extending to the Rhine and the English Channel. His campaigns, meticulously chronicled in Commentarii de Bello Gallico, describe engagements with Gallic tribes, logistics for legions numbering 50,000 to 60,000 soldiers, and the establishment of Roman administrative systems in newly conquered regions. These conquests expanded Rome's territorial control and enhanced Caesar's political leverage upon his return to Italy. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon River in 49 BC marked a decisive constitutional crisis. By taking armed forces into Italy without Senate authorization, he challenged the traditional separation of military and civil authority. The ensuing civil war, involving multiple legions and widespread engagement across the Italian peninsula, culminated in the defeat of Pompeian forces. Caesar's appointment as dictator in 49 BC and subsequent consolidation of authority demonstrate the erosion of republican checks and the practical limitations of dual consul governance under extraordinary circumstances. Following Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Rome entered another phase of civil conflict. Political power struggles between the Second Triumvirate, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, and forces loyal to the senatorial faction led to engagements throughout Italy, Gaul, and the eastern provinces. Naval and land battles, including the decisive Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, eliminated opposition forces, while administrative restructuring under the triumvirs expanded provincial oversight, taxation systems, and military organization. Octavian's eventual victory over Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC and his subsequent assumption of sole authority transitioned the Republic into a de facto monarchy under republican forms, culminating in his formal title as Augustus in 27 BC. Economically, the late Republic experienced both growth and strain. Expansion into Hispania, Gaul, Greece, and the eastern Mediterranean brought significant wealth, but also introduced inflationary pressures, reliance on slave labor, and concentration of resources in elite hands. The administration of provinces required systematic taxation, overseen by governors and publicani, and the exploitation of mines and agricultural production provided the Republic with substantial fiscal revenue. The economic integration of vast territories demanded reforms in currency, infrastructure, and resource management, laying the foundations for the imperial fiscal system. Culturally, Rome assimilated influences from Greece, Etruria, and the broader Mediterranean. Greek art, architecture, literature, and philosophy were studied and incorporated into elite Roman society, evident in the construction of public buildings, temples, and forums. Education for the Roman elite increasingly included Greek tutors and literary curricula, while public monuments commemorated military victories and civic achievements. Religion remained formally integrated with governance, with magistrates participating in ritual oversight, augury guiding military decisions, and civic festivals reinforcing institutional continuity. By the end of the late Republic in 27 BC, Rome had evolved from a regional power into a territorial state spanning the Western Mediterranean, with administrative systems capable of managing provinces, citizen populations, and military operations across vast distances. The political and social pressures of expansion, coupled with the concentration of military power in individual generals, highlighted the limitations of the republican system, necessitating the eventual transition to imperial governance. Institutional developments in law, military organization, and provincial management during this period directly influenced the structures of the Principate and the consolidation of power under Augustus. The transition from republic to empire culminated in 27 BC, when Octavian, the adopted heir of Julius Caesar, consolidated political authority and assumed the title Augustus. The formal establishment of the Principate marked a system in which the emperor exercised ultimate power while maintaining the republican forms of government, including the Senate, consular magistracies, and citizen assemblies. Augustus retained the office of Princeps, or First Citizen, which provided executive authority over legislation, military command, and provincial administration without abolishing traditional republican institutions. Contemporary records, including inscriptions, coins, and the residential Gesti Divi Augusti, document the careful balancing of public perception and de facto authority that characterized his rule. Augustus' reforms laid the administrative, fiscal, and military foundations for a period later termed the Pax Romana, a sustained era of stability and territorial expansion lasting more than 2 centuries. Augustus reorganized provincial governance to ensure efficient administration and prevent the concentration of military power in local commanders. Provinces with significant military presence, such as Germania, Hispania, and Syria, were placed under the direct authority of the emperor, while senatorial provinces, including Sicily, Africa, and Asia Minor, were largely peaceful and governed by consuls or praetors under Senate oversight. This division allowed Augustus to maintain control over the legions, prevent rebellion, and integrate provincial taxation into a structured fiscal system. Contemporary estimates indicate that the imperial army numbered approximately 28 legions, each consisting of roughly 5,000 soldiers, supplemented by auxiliary units drawn from non-citizen populations. The total military manpower, including auxiliaries, likely exceeded 250,000 personnel deployed across the empire's frontiers, internal security posts, and strategic garrisons. Economically, the Principate implemented reforms to stabilize revenue and facilitate trade. Augustus reorganized taxation in provinces, replacing inconsistent local levies with standardized tribute, customs duties, and indirect taxes. The collection of rents, tribute, and grain taxes supported both military expenditure and urban administration. Large-scale infrastructure projects, including roads, bridges, aqueducts, and harbors, enabled efficient troop movement and commercial exchange across territories spanning from Britain and Germania to North Africa and the Near East. In Rome alone, the population, estimated at 1 million inhabitants, benefited from urban amenities such as aqueducts supplying fresh water, sewer systems, and public granaries. The integration of provincial resources and urban centers provided a stable economic foundation that underpinned Augustus' authority and the Pax Romana. The emperor's consolidation of power was accompanied by legal and administrative reforms. Augustus established a uniform civil service composed of equestrian officials who administered provincial finances, justice, and public works. He codified procedures for succession, military command, and senatorial oversight, ensuring continuity of governance. Roman law was systematized, and the Praetorian prefecture provided centralized judicial authority. Provincial administration relied on local elites to implement Roman policies, reinforcing loyalty while integrating regional governance structures. Inscriptions and legal documents from Egypt, Asia Minor, and Gaul illustrate the practical functioning of these institutions, including census records, tax registers, and legal decrees. Military campaigns under the early empire extended Rome's frontiers and secured previously contested regions. Augustus conducted campaigns in Hispania, the Alps, Dalmatia, Pannonia, Rhaetia, and Germania, consolidating territories acquired during the Republic and establishing fortified borders, roads, and military colonies. By the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD, 3 legions were destroyed by Germanic tribes under Arminius, which temporarily halted expansion east of the Rhine. Rome subsequently focused on consolidating control over the Rhine and Danube frontiers, establishing permanent military infrastructure, including forts, watchtowers, and garrisons, to maintain border security. These deployments required sophisticated logistics, supply chains, and administration to sustain legions over long distances, as documented in surviving military diplomas and archaeological remains. The Julio-Claudian dynasty, 27 BC, 68 AD, continued expansion and consolidation. Emperors such as Tiberius, 14 to 37 AD, Caligula, 37 to 41 AD, Claudius, 41 to 54 AD, and Nero, 54 to 68 AD, oversaw territorial integration, administrative reform, and urban development. Claudius notably expanded imperial territory to include Britannia in 43 AD, establishing legions, roads, and provincial governance structures to control the new province. The conquest included approximately 20,000 to 30,000 Roman soldiers, supplemented by auxiliaries, and involved campaigns against tribal confederations. Administrative systems included appointed governors, taxation offices, and urban colonies that facilitated Romanization and resource extraction. Archaeological evidence in Britain, including forts, roads, and urban centers such as Londinium, confirms Roman military and civic integration. The Flavian dynasty, 69 to 96 AD, established following the year of the 4 emperors, 69 AD, restored stability after civil turmoil. Vespasian, 69 to 79 AD, and Titus, 79 to 81 AD, completed the Colosseum, improved urban infrastructure, and extended military oversight to maintain order in provinces. The Flavian period emphasized practical administration and military discipline, consolidating control over Judea following the First Jewish Revolt, 66 to 73 AD. The revolt, documented in Josephus Bellum Judaicum, involved Roman forces numbering approximately 60,000 soldiers and resulted in the capture of Jerusalem, the destruction of the Second Temple, and significant resettlement policies. These operations exemplify Rome's capacity to project military power, enforce political authority, and integrate conquered populations into imperial structures. Trade and economic integration flourished under the early empire. Rome's Mediterranean network linked the Italian peninsula with Hispania, Gaul, North Africa, Egypt, Greece, and Asia Minor. Goods such as grain, olive oil, wine, metals, textiles, and luxury items were transported across well-maintained roads and via the imperial navy, ensuring the provisioning of urban centers and legions. Egypt, governed as a personal imperial province, supplied grain to Rome, maintaining food security for the capital. Coinage was standardized across the empire, facilitating commerce and tax collection, while inscriptions indicate the development of financial administration offices, including rationing, tolls, and public contracts. Culturally, the Principate promoted public works, literature, and religious continuity. Augustus instituted building projects including forums, temples, aqueducts, and theaters, while emphasizing civic morality and the restoration of traditional Roman religious practices. State-sanctioned priesthoods and religious magistracies were integrated into governance, reinforcing legitimacy and civic cohesion. Public inscriptions commemorated victories, infrastructure projects, and civic benefactions, providing documentary evidence of the administration's priorities and the emperor's role in the public sphere. The period also saw the codification of religious festivals, public ceremonies, and legal frameworks connecting civic, military, and religious life. The early empire also faced internal challenges, including succession disputes, provincial revolts, and economic strain. The year of the four emperors, 69 AD, demonstrated vulnerabilities in succession, while economic pressures arose from the cost of maintaining the legions, urban populations, and provincial administration. Emperors implemented fiscal policies, including taxation adjustments, grain distributions, and control of luxury imports, to maintain economic stability. Provincial integration relied on local elites for administration, while the army ensured compliance with imperial authority. Epigraphic evidence and papyri confirmed the regular collection of taxes, allocation of grain, and maintenance of public infrastructure throughout the empire. By 192 AD, the empire had reached a high point of administrative efficiency, territorial control, and cultural integration, encompassing the Italian peninsula, Gaul, Hispania, Britannia, North Africa, Greece, Asia Minor, and the Near East. The early empire maintained a centralized military structure, an extensive bureaucracy, and an integrated provincial system, which collectively ensured political stability, economic growth, and social cohesion. The Principate system, combining formal republican institutions with concentrated executive power, enabled Rome to govern diverse populations across a vast geographic area while maintaining continuity of law, administration, and military command. By the early 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire, after nearly 2 centuries of relative stability under the Principate, entered a period of profound political, military, and economic turbulence, later termed the Crisis of the 3rd century. This period, beginning with the assassination of Commodus in 192 AD and extending to the accession of Diocletian in 284 AD, encompassed frequent imperial turnover, civil war, external invasions, economic disruption, and temporary territorial fragmentation. The foundations laid during the Principate, centralized administration, professional legions, provincial governance, and fiscal systems, were strained by overextension, population pressures, and social inequalities, resulting in systemic instability. The assassination of Commodus in 192 AD initiated the Year of the Five Emperors, 193 AD. Following his death, Pertinax assumed the throne but was murdered by the Praetorian Guard after 3 months. The Guard auctioned the empire to Didius Julianus, whose purchase of the imperial office triggered widespread dissent. Provincial legions, including those in Pannonia, Germania, and Syria, elevated generals Septimius Severus, Pescennius Niger, and Clodius Albinus as rivals, initiating civil war. Septimius Severus, commanding legions from the Danubian provinces, marched on Rome, deposed Didius Julianus, and consolidated power, defeating Niger in 194 AD and Albinus in 197 AD. Records indicate that Severus commanded over 40,000 legionaries, supplemented by allied troops, emphasizing the reliance on provincial military forces for legitimacy. Severus' reign, 193 to 211 AD, established precedents for military domination of political authority. He expanded the Praetorian Guard to ensure loyalty, restructured provincial governorships, and increased legionary pay, documented in contemporary inscriptions and papyri. Campaigns in Parthia and along the eastern frontier secured Roman territories and client kingdoms, including Mesopotamian buffer states. Severus' administration exemplified both the centralization of imperial authority and the militarization of governance, setting a model that subsequent emperors would replicate amid crises. Following Severus, the empire experienced a rapid succession of rulers, with over 20 emperors reigning between 211 and 235 AD, many elevated by legions rather than Senate sanction. Political instability arose from military coups, provincial rebellions, and contested claims to the throne. The period is characterized by civil wars in multiple regions, with armies numbering up to 30,000 to 50,000 soldiers engaged in campaigns across Italy, Gaul, and the eastern provinces. Cassius Dio documents that emperors often ruled only months before being overthrown, highlighting the fragility of political authority in this era. Concurrently, external pressures intensified. Germanic tribes, including the Goths, Alemanni, and Franks, crossed the Rhine and Danube frontiers, conducting raids that threatened provinces such as Gaul, Rhaetia, and Pannonia. The Eastern Front faced incursions from the Sasanian Empire, particularly under Ardashir I and Shapur I, who captured key Roman cities and demanded tributary settlements. Contemporary sources report repeated sieges, the loss of frontier fortifications, and the temporary occupation of regions such as Mesopotamia. The empire's borders were overstretched, and the logistical challenge of supplying and reinforcing legions across these frontiers strained administrative and fiscal systems. Economic disruption accompanied political and military crises. Coinage debasement, inflation, and disruption of trade networks occurred as provincial production faltered and urban centers experienced population decline. Records from papyri in Egypt, inscriptions in Gaul, and accounts from Roman writers indicate that grain shipments to Rome were irregular, tax collection decreased, and local markets contracted. The empire's reliance on slave labor in agriculture and urban industries was further stressed by the devastation of war and raiding. Economic contraction also reduced the state's ability to finance legions and maintain infrastructure, prompting localized crises and urban decline. Amid these pressures, temporary fragmentation of the empire occurred. The Gallic Empire, 260 to 274 AD, including Gaul, Britannia, and parts of Germania, seceded under Postumus, maintaining Roman institutions but operating independently. Simultaneously, the Palmyrene Empire, 260 to 273 AD, encompassing Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and parts of Anatolia, was established under Queen Zenobia, asserting de facto autonomy while nominally recognizing imperial legitimacy. Roman records, inscriptions, and coinage from these breakaway states confirm the continuation of Roman administrative practices, including taxation, legal administration, and military organization, despite the fragmentation of central authority. These secessions illustrate the empire's vulnerability to regional military power and highlight the importance of provincial loyalty to the central administration. During this period, emperors such as Valerian, 253 to 260 AD, and Gallienus, 253 to 268 AD, faced simultaneous internal rebellions and external invasions. Valerian's capture by the Sasanian king Shapur I in 260 AD marked a significant symbolic and strategic loss, representing the first recorded instance of a Roman emperor taken prisoner in battle. Gallienus' subsequent administration involved a decentralized military strategy, delegating authority to regional generals, including Claudius II and Aurelian, to defend critical frontiers. The deployment of forces across the Rhine, Danube, and eastern borders often required rapid mobilization of up to 50,000 troops per theater, highlighting logistical complexity and the strategic challenge of defending a sprawling empire under internal and external pressures. The military innovations of the period were significant. Mobile cavalry units were increasingly employed to respond to raiding parties and frontier incursions, while the army's hierarchical structure was adjusted to accommodate regional autonomy and rapid deployment. Emperors implemented reforms to fortify urban centers, including city walls, garrisons, and defensive fortifications, particularly in Gaul, Italy, and the eastern provinces. Archaeological evidence of reinforced walls, watchtowers, and military infrastructure confirms these defensive adaptations, demonstrating the empire's capacity for structural response despite systemic instability. The accession of Aurelian, 270 to 275 AD, marked a turning point in the reunification of the empire. He defeated the Gallic Empire at the Battle of Chalons, 274 AD, and reconquered the Palmyrene territories, restoring nominal imperial cohesion. Aurelian implemented monetary reforms, stabilized currency, and undertook defensive construction, including the Aurelian walls in Rome, to protect urban populations from increasing barbarian pressure. His campaigns required mobilization of multiple legions, coordination with provincial governors, and the reintegration of secessionist administrations into the imperial framework. Despite reunification under Aurelian, structural issues persisted, including succession instability, fiscal strain, and frontier vulnerability. The empire's recovery depended on administrative reform, efficient taxation, and restructuring of military command to prevent regional governors from asserting independent authority. Contemporary sources, Inscriptions and papyri indicate that military logistics, provincial administration, and infrastructure restoration were priorities for emperors in the latter 3rd century, forming the basis for stabilization under Diocletian. The crisis of the 3rd century illustrates the intersection of political, military, and economic pressures on a vast territorial state. Civil wars, rapid imperial turnover, barbarian invasions, and secessionist entities strained Roman governance. Yet, even amid these crises, the continuity of Roman law, administrative structures, and military organization persisted. Provincial administration maintained taxation, census data, and legal authority, while legions continued to operate as both instruments of defense and mechanisms of political legitimacy. Inscriptions, coinage, and papyri confirm the persistence of Roman administrative identity despite fragmentation and localized autonomy. The accession of Diocletian in 284 AD marked the formal end of the crisis of the 3rd century and the beginning of the late Roman Empire. Diocletian instituted systemic reforms designed to stabilize governance, improve fiscal collection, restructure the military, and secure imperial succession. These reforms, documented in inscriptions, edicts, and the Codex Theodosianus, included the division of imperial authority through the Tetrarchy, in which 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, Caesars, administered separate regions of the empire. Diocletian directly controlled the eastern provinces, including Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt, while the western Augustus oversaw Italy, Gaul, Hispania, and Britain. The Tetrarchy aimed to ensure rapid military response to external threats and orderly succession by linking subordinate emperors to senior rulers, reducing the frequency of civil war caused by contested succession. Administrative reforms expanded the bureaucracy and restructured provincial governance. Diocletian increased the number of provinces from approximately 46 to 101, grouping them into dioceses overseen by vicarii, which reported to the praetorian prefects, who, in turn, answered to the emperor. Taxation was standardized, with land, poll, and trade taxes assessed systematically. Egypt, Syria, Gaul, and Africa were carefully monitored through provincial censuses, military inspections, and fiscal audits. These reforms, confirmed in surviving papyri and legal codes, increased state revenue, allowing the empire to maintain an extensive military presence across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. The army was restructured to address both internal and external pressures. Diocletian expanded the limitanei, border troops, along the Rhine, Danube, and eastern frontiers, tasked with frontier defense and monitoring incursions by Germanic and Sasanian forces. Mobile field armies, or comitatenses, were deployed to respond to raids, rebellions, or civil unrest. By the early 4th century, the total military establishment exceeded 400,000 soldiers, a combination of legionaries, auxiliaries, and foederati, allied non-Roman troops. Fortifications along the frontiers were strengthened, including towers, walls, and fortified cities, and logistical supply networks were enhanced to ensure rapid troop movement. Inscriptions and contemporary accounts document extensive construction of forts along the Rhine, Danube, and eastern frontiers, demonstrating the empire's commitment to securing its borders amid increasing external threats. The religious landscape of the late empire changed significantly under Diocletian and his successors. Although the empire maintained a traditional religious structure with state rituals, priesthoods, and imperial cults, the rise of Christianity presented both administrative and social challenges. By 303 AD, Diocletian initiated the Great Persecution, targeting Christian communities in the eastern provinces, confiscating property, and executing leaders. Contemporary documents, including imperial edicts, confirm systematic measures against Christians, reflecting both the challenge of integrating a rapidly growing religious movement and the ongoing policy of religious uniformity. Despite persecution, Christianity continued to expand in urban centers, ports, and provincial towns, establishing networks of communities, bishops, and clerical administration that persisted into the 4th century. The early 4th century witnessed further administrative and military developments under Constantine the Great, 306 to 337 AD. Constantine, emerging victorious after the civil wars that followed Diocletian's abdication, reunited the empire under his authority and implemented reforms that strengthened imperial control. He reorganized provincial administration, codified legal practices, and continued Diocletian's expansion and restructuring of the army. Notably, Constantine legalized Christianity with the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, permitting freedom of worship and restoring confiscated property to Christian communities. Contemporary letters, inscriptions, and imperial decrees indicate that Christianity became integrated into state structures, with bishops increasingly participating in civic administration and urban governance. Constantine also initiated the construction of Constantinople, modern Istanbul, in 330 AD as a new imperial capital, strategically located on the Bosporus to secure trade routes and military control of the eastern Mediterranean. Externally, the late empire faced continuous threats along multiple frontiers. Germanic tribes such as the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, and Franks exerted pressure on the Rhine, Danube, and northern Italy, conducting raids and migrations. In the east, the Sasanian Empire, under rulers such as Shapur II, engaged in repeated military campaigns in Mesopotamia, Armenia, and Syria, challenging Roman territorial control. Detailed records, including military correspondence, inscriptions, and chroniclers such as Ammianus Marcellinus, describe campaigns involving multiple legions, fortification construction, and extensive logistics to repel incursions and maintain imperial authority. The empire relied on a combination of permanent garrisons, mobile field armies, and diplomacy, including treaties, federati arrangements, and client kingdoms, to manage frontier pressures. Economic pressures intensified during the late empire. Recurrent invasions, civil wars, and administrative expansion increased fiscal demands. Coinage debasement, documented through numismatic evidence, led to inflation, reduced the value of silver currency, and disrupted commerce. Agricultural production suffered from raiding, land abandonment, and taxation burdens, affecting grain supply, particularly to urban centers such as Rome, Milan, and Constantinople. Diocletian attempted economic stabilization through the Edict on Maximum Prices, 301 AD, which established price ceilings and wage controls. While largely ineffective in controlling inflation, the edict demonstrates imperial intervention in economic regulation during systemic stress. Provincial administration, documented through papyri from Egypt and inscriptions from Gaul, maintained taxation, record-keeping, and urban provisioning despite these pressures. The Western Empire faced structural vulnerabilities that intensified over the 4th and 5th centuries. administrative division between the western and eastern halves, while improving governance, created regional disparities in resources and military capacity. Western provinces, including Italy, Gaul, Hispania, and North Africa, experienced declining population, urban contraction, and increased dependency on mobile armies to maintain order. Repeated invasions by Visigoths, Alaric I, 395 to 410 AD, the Vandals, 429 to 455 AD, and incursions by Huns under Attila, mid-5th century AD, further destabilized the western provinces. Contemporary chroniclers report sieges, sackings, and disruptions in tax collection, illustrating the cumulative effect of military pressure on the administrative capacity of the Western Empire. The Visigothic sack of Rome in 410 AD marked a significant symbolic and practical crisis, representing the first time in nearly 8 centuries that the city had fallen to a foreign force. Subsequent invasions, including the Vandals' conquest of North Africa and capture of Carthage in 439 AD, deprived the Western Empire of vital grain supply and fiscal revenue. Attempts to repel invaders, including campaigns by emperors such as Majorian 457 to 461 AD, and generals like Ricimer, met with limited success due to insufficient military resources, reliance on foederati, and internal factionalism. Documents, military records, and correspondence detail ongoing struggles to mobilize legions, supply fortifications, and negotiate settlements with invading groups. Administrative decentralization and political fragmentation contributed to the weakening of central authority. Emperors were increasingly dependent on military support from provincial commanders and foederati leaders, reducing direct control over distant provinces. Inscriptions and surviving edicts indicate delegation of civic, fiscal, and military responsibilities to local magistrates, generals, and barbarian allies, illustrating a practical adaptation to declining central authority, but also creating conditions for semi-independent rule. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD by the Germanic general Odoacer marks the conventional endpoint of the Western Roman Empire, though Roman law, institutions, and elite culture persisted in former Western territories under successor kingdoms. Culturally, the late empire continued to integrate diverse populations, maintaining Roman legal codes, urban planning, and administrative practices. The Codex Theodosianus, for 38 AD, codified imperial legislation, unifying law across Western and Eastern territories. Urban centers retained Roman architecture, aqueducts, forums, and civic infrastructure, supporting administrative, economic, and social continuity. Christianity, formally integrated into imperial governance following Constantine, increasingly structured urban and provincial life, providing networks of ecclesiastical administration that complemented civic authority and preserved continuity of governance practices. Bishoprics, councils, and diocesan structures maintained record-keeping, dispute resolution, and social organization, effectively supporting continuity even as Western political authority collapsed. Following the deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD and the effective end of centralized Roman authority in the West, the Eastern Roman Empire, based in Constantinople, continued as the direct institutional successor of Rome. Governed by emperors who retained the title of Augustus, the Eastern Empire preserved Roman law, administrative structures, taxation systems, and military organization, ensuring continuity of the Roman state in the eastern Mediterranean. The capital, Constantinople, strategically located on the Bosporus, controlled maritime routes between the Aegean, Black Sea, and eastern Mediterranean, allowing the empire to consolidate revenue, maintain military readiness, and project authority over the remaining provinces of the East. The early Eastern Empire faced immediate challenges, both internal and external. Provinces in the Eastern Mediterranean, including Asia Minor, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and the Balkans, required continuous military oversight due to threats from Persian Sasanian expansion, incursions by nomadic and semi-nomadic groups such as the Huns, Slavs, and Avars, and local uprisings. The Eastern Army was organized around themes of provincial defense, including the Limitanii guarding frontiers and comitatenses serving as mobile strategic reserves. Military correspondence, surviving manuals, and chronicles such as those of Procopius indicate that field armies ranged between 30,000 and 50,000 troops, supplemented by fortified urban garrisons and naval patrols controlling key ports. Frontier defense relied on permanent fortifications, including walls, watchtowers, and river crossings, constructed and maintained using both imperial and local resources. The reign of Justinian I, 527 to 565 AD, represents a high point of early Byzantine consolidation. Justinian sought to restore Roman territorial control, legal coherence, and administrative efficiency. Through military campaigns conducted by generals Belisarius and Narses, the empire reconquered portions of Italy, including Rome and Ravenna, parts of North Africa, including Carthage, and parts of southern Spain. Contemporary sources, including Procopius' Wars of Justinian and surviving military correspondence, document that these campaigns mobilized tens of thousands of soldiers, coordinated naval logistics, and relied on both local recruitment and mercenary contingents. Although reconquests were temporary in some regions, they demonstrated the capacity of the Eastern Empire to project power beyond its traditional eastern borders. Justinian's most enduring domestic contribution was the codification of Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis, 529 to 534 AD. This comprehensive legal compilation systematized existing imperial legislation, senatorial decrees, and jurist writings into a coherent body of law, covering civil, administrative, and criminal matters. Legal scholars and practitioners applied these codes across the eastern provinces, ensuring administrative consistency and facilitating judicial procedures. Surviving manuscripts and inscriptions confirm that Justinian's legal reforms served as the basis for Byzantine governance, local courts, and provincial administration for centuries. The codification preserved Roman legal continuity from the late Principate and late Empire, creating a standardized framework for imperial authority and civic regulation. Economically, the Eastern Empire relied on both agrarian production and long-distance trade. Egypt continued as a principal grain supplier for Constantinople, while Asia Minor, Syria, and the Levant provided olives, wine, textiles, and raw materials. Urban centers such as Antioch, Alexandria, Thessalonica, and Constantinople maintained sophisticated markets, facilitated taxation, and administered public works, including aqueducts, roads, and harbors. Papyrus documents from Egypt, along with inscriptions across Asia Minor, provide detailed records of landholdings, tax assessments, and grain shipments. Fiscal reforms under Justinian, including standardized tax collection, enhanced revenue stability, and administrative oversight allowed the state to finance military campaigns, public works, and bureaucratic expansion. Religious policy was central to early Byzantine governance. Christianity, fully integrated into the state after Constantine, remained both a unifying and contentious force. Justinian implemented policies promoting orthodoxy according to Chalcedonian Christianity, suppressing heretical sects and non-Christian religious practices. Contemporary letters, church council records, and imperial edicts document active imperial involvement in ecclesiastical affairs, including the appointment of bishops, funding of churches, and regulation of doctrine. Justinian commissioned monumental architectural projects, including the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, completed 537 AD, symbolizing both religious authority and imperial power. Church institutions, such as monasteries and bishoprics, provided administrative, judicial, and charitable functions, reinforcing the state's capacity to govern and maintain social order. Military and administrative challenges persisted despite internal consolidation. The Sasanian Empire under Khosrow I continued to contest eastern territories, engaging in campaigns in Mesopotamia and Armenia. Defensive coordination involved fortified cities, mobile armies, and diplomatic negotiations. In the Balkans, incursions by Slavs, Avars, and Huns required reinforced garrisons, logistical planning, and temporary relocation of populations. Provincial governors were responsible for taxation, recruitment, fortification maintenance, and local law enforcement, operating under imperial oversight documented in administrative manuals, letters, and decrees. These measures preserved both territorial integrity and administrative continuity. The iconoclast controversy, 8th to 9th centuries AD, later influenced religious and administrative policy. Although occurring after Justinian, it illustrates continuity and adaptation of imperial authority in ecclesiastical matters. Emperors such as Leo III implemented policies regulating religious images, convening councils, and issuing legal edicts. Surviving canons, letters, and inscriptions show how imperial and ecclesiastical administration were closely intertwined, with the emperor exerting authority over doctrine, enforcement, and church property management. These measures reinforced centralized control, demonstrating continuity of Roman administrative principles adapted to religious governance. Urbanization and economic resilience in the early Byzantine period reflect strategic adaptation. Cities served as administrative centers, military bases, and trade hubs, linking hinterlands to the capital. Constantinople's defensive walls, including the Theodosian walls, completed 413 AD, provided security, enabling population growth and commercial activity. Archaeological evidence confirms the maintenance of aqueducts, cisterns, and granaries to support urban populations. Roads, bridges, and harbors facilitated troop movement and commerce, maintaining imperial cohesion across a diverse and expansive territory. Succession and governance in the early Byzantine Empire emphasized bureaucratic stability. Imperial offices, including the Praetorian prefects, logothetes, quaestors, and count of the sacred largesses, oversaw fiscal collection, judicial administration, and provincial supervision. Administrative continuity ensured that even during periods of military campaign or internal disruption, provincial records, taxation, and legal processes remained operational. Surviving correspondence, inscriptions, and legal texts demonstrate the application of Roman administrative methods adapted to the Eastern Mediterranean context, including the integration of local elites and provincial magistrates into the imperial framework. By the 10th and early 11th centuries, emperors such as Basil II, 976 to 1025 AD, consolidated military, administrative, and fiscal control. Campaigns in the Balkans, Anatolia, and the eastern frontiers expanded and secured Byzantine influence. Basil II's campaigns against the Bulgarians, documented in chronicles and inscriptions, demonstrate strategic mobilization of field armies, fortified positions, and administrative oversight of newly acquired territories. Provincial administration continued to integrate taxation, local governance, and military organization, ensuring stability, revenue collection, and law enforcement across reconquered areas. The death of Emperor Basil II in 1025 AD marked the transition from the early to the late Byzantine period. Basil II's reign, 976 to 1025 AD, had consolidated imperial authority, expanded borders, and strengthened fiscal and military structures. His death initiated a period of political instability, succession crises, and territorial contraction, which would characterize the late Byzantine Empire until the fall of Constantinople in 1453 AD. Despite these challenges, the empire maintained Roman legal and administrative structures, a continuous imperial lineage, and the integration of Christianity into governance, ensuring the persistence of Roman institutions in the Eastern Mediterranean. Immediately following Basil II, succession disputes undermined central authority. Emperors such as Constantine VIII, 1025 to 1028 AD, Romanos III Argyros, 1028 to 1034 AD, and Michael IV, 1034 to 1041 AD, navigated both internal factionalism and external threats. Administrative records, imperial correspondence, and chronicles demonstrate that the bureaucracy, comprising offices such as the logothetes, praetorian prefects, and provincial strategoi, remained operational, though effectiveness varied with the competence and stability of each emperor. Provincial governance relied on a combination of military commanders and civilian administrators to oversee taxation, local law, and logistical support for the army. Externally, the late Byzantine Empire faced increasing pressure from multiple fronts. In the West, Normans and later Latin Crusaders targeted Byzantine territories in southern Italy, including Apulia, Calabria, and Sicily. Byzantine military campaigns during this period involved coordinated deployment of field armies, fortification of strategic positions, and naval operations across the Adriatic. In the east, Seljuk Turks began incursions into Anatolia in the mid-11th century, culminating in the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 AD, where Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes was captured. Contemporary chronicles, including the Alexiad by Anna Komnene and surviving imperial letters, detail the size of armies, ranging from 20,000 to 40,000 troops, and the logistical challenges of defending Anatolia while maintaining the security of Constantinople. The loss of Anatolian territories after Manzikert significantly weakened the Byzantine military and fiscal base. Anatolia had provided both manpower for the army and agricultural surplus for taxation. Inscriptions, tax registers, and legal documents confirm a decline in revenue, requiring the state to rely increasingly on mercenary forces and alliances with local elites. Provincial governors retained legal and fiscal authority, but the empire's capacity to project force into contested regions diminished. This period demonstrates the interdependence of military control, economic resources, and administrative efficiency for sustaining imperial authority. In the 12th century, emperors such as Alexios I Komnenos, 1081 to 1118 AD, initiated reforms to stabilize the empire and recover lost territories. Alexios reorganized the military, creating a more professional army supplemented by pronoia grants, land assigned to soldiers in exchange for military service. Contemporary administrative records and military treatises indicate the pronoia system allowed the empire to sustain a standing force despite diminished central revenues. Alexios also leveraged diplomacy with Western powers, including the papacy, and crusading states, negotiating military support, loans, and temporary territorial concessions to secure borders against Normans, Pecheneg, and Seljuks. The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204 AD, represented a critical disruption in Byzantine continuity. Instead of reaching the Holy Land, Crusader forces, influenced by Venetian interests, besieged and captured Constantinople in 1204 AD, establishing the Latin Empire. Contemporary records, including the Chronicle of George Acropolites, document the sack, looting, and administrative disruption of the city, marking a severe fracture in Byzantine governance. The Latin occupation displaced imperial authority, confiscated state wealth, and forced Byzantine elites to relocate to successor states such as Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond. Despite the occupation, these successor states maintained Roman administrative practices, legal structures, and the orthodox ecclesiastical hierarchy, ensuring continuity of governance and imperial identity. The Empire of Nicaea, 1204 to 1261 AD, played a pivotal role in restoring Byzantine authority. Under emperors such as Theodore I Lascaris, 1205 to 1222 AD, and Michael VIII Palaiologos, 1259 to 1282 AD, Nicaea rebuilt administrative, fiscal, and military structures, asserting control over Asia Minor and parts of Thrace. Michael VIII successfully recaptured Constantinople in 1261 AD, re-establishing the Byzantine Empire under Palaiologan rule. Inscriptions, imperial correspondence, and legal codices from this period demonstrate the re-implementation of Roman administrative frameworks, provincial taxation systems, and military organization, despite territorial contraction and economic limitations. The Palaiologan period, 1261 to 1453 AD, faced continuous challenges, including Ottoman expansion, Latin principalities, and internal factionalism. Strategic fortifications, including city walls and frontier garrisons, were maintained, while provincial governors exercised delegated authority over taxation, justice, and local defense. Imperial correspondence and fiscal records indicate efforts to centralize revenue collection, maintain urban provisioning, and support mercenary forces for frontier defense. Despite these measures, Ottoman forces gradually eroded Byzantine territory, particularly in Bithynia, Thrace, and the southern Balkans, leading to progressive territorial contraction. Religious administration remained integral to governance throughout the late Byzantine period. The Orthodox Church, led by the Patriarch of Constantinople, administered ecclesiastical law, education, and charitable institutions. Church councils, correspondence, and imperial edicts document collaboration between the emperor and bishops to maintain doctrinal orthodoxy, adjudicate legal matters, and manage church property. Ecclesiastical networks functioned as extensions of imperial administration, particularly in regions where direct control was limited due to military or economic constraints. Economically, the late Byzantine Empire faced contraction due to territorial loss, diminished agricultural output, and disruption of trade routes. Numismatic evidence demonstrates the debasement of coinage and inflation, affecting commerce and taxation. Maritime trade in the Aegean, Black Sea, and Eastern Mediterranean continued to provide revenue, as evidenced by customs records, merchant correspondence, and port inscriptions. Urban centers such as Constantinople, Thessalonica, and Trebizond maintained administrative functions, markets, and artisan production, supporting fiscal sustainability and regional governance despite overall economic decline. By the early 15th century, Byzantine authority was largely restricted to Constantinople, parts of Thrace, and select Aegean islands. Ottoman pressure intensified, culminating in a sustained siege. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 AD, under Sultan Mehmed II, represents the definitive end of the Eastern Roman Empire and Roman imperial continuity. Contemporary accounts, including those of Niccolò Barbaro and George Francis, describe the final defense, siege logistics, and the capture of the city. Administrative continuity was terminated, yet Roman legal traditions, orthodox ecclesiastical structures, and cultural practices persisted in successor states and influenced neighboring territories. The late Byzantine period demonstrates that despite territorial contraction, military defeat, and economic decline, the institutions, laws, and cultural identity of Rome persisted. Administrative practices, provincial governance, fiscal systems, military organization, and ecclesiastical structures maintained continuity across centuries. Even after the fall of Constantinople, these frameworks influenced the development of orthodox governance, legal codes in Eastern Europe, and state organization in successor principalities. Roman administrative, military, and ecclesiastical models, developed from 753 BC through 1453 AD, formed a coherent, continuous tradition that endured beyond the empire's political demise. The Roman state, from its founding on the Palatine Hill in 753 BC through the Republic, the Principate, the crisis of the 3rd century, the late Empire, and the survival of the Eastern Roman Empire until 1453 AD, represents the most enduring political and administrative civilization of the ancient world. The continuity of institutions, law, military organization, urban planning, and governance across more than 2 millennia distinguishes Rome not merely as an empire, but as a foundational framework for Western and Mediterranean civilization. From the fall of Constantinople in 1453 AD, the Roman legacy persisted in the administration, jurisprudence, ecclesiastical structures, military doctrine, and urban infrastructure across successor states, influencing subsequent European polities and shaping the structure of modern governance. The Roman legal system remains one of the clearest and most direct continuities from 753 BC to 1453 AD. Beginning with early codifications such as the Law of the 12 Tables, c. 50 BC, Roman law evolved through republican statutes, senatorial decrees, imperial edicts, and codifications under emperors, including Theodosius II and Justinian I. The Corpus Juris Civilis, 529 to 534 AD, consolidated centuries of legislation, jurisprudential writings, and imperial rulings, preserving legal continuity for centuries. Surviving manuscripts and later commentaries confirm that these legal codes guided civil administration, property law, contract regulation, and criminal justice. During the Palaiologan period, Byzantine officials continued to apply principles of Roman civil law to taxation, commercial regulation, and civic administration, providing a foundation for successor states in the Balkans and influencing emerging legal systems in Eastern Europe. Administrative structures developed throughout Rome's history reinforced continuity and bureaucratic resilience. The Republic introduced magistracies, the Senate, and provincial governance, which evolved under the Principate into a hierarchical, professionalized bureaucracy with imperial oversight. Diocletian's and Constantine's reforms refined these structures, introducing the tetrarchy, dioceses, and thematic military provinces, which endured in various forms throughout the Byzantine period. Imperial correspondence, inscriptions, and administrative manuals demonstrate the consistent operation of tax collection, record-keeping, justice administration, and military provisioning. The persistence of these structures enabled the Eastern Roman Empire to maintain governance, law enforcement, and fiscal operations despite territorial contraction, external invasion, or temporary disruptions during the Latin occupation, 1204 to 1261 AD. Military organization similarly demonstrates continuity across centuries. The Roman legions, first formalized in the Republican period, became a professional, structured force under the Principate. Soldiers were equipped, trained, and deployed according to a standardized system, with permanent bases, fortifications, and mobile field units. Diocletian and Constantine introduced limitanii and comitatenses, separating frontier defense from mobile strategic reserves. Inscriptions, military manuals, and campaign records show careful attention to logistics, recruitment, and strategic positioning. During the Byzantine period, these structures evolved to accommodate paranoia-based service, mercenary recruitment, and frontier defense against Seljuks, Normans, and Ottomans, but retained the organizational principles of Roman military command, discipline, and provincial integration. Urban planning and infrastructure constitute another major element of the Roman legacy. From the Palatine settlement to Constantinople, Roman cities featured streets, aqueducts, sewers, public baths, forums, administrative buildings, and defensive walls, all constructed according to standardized engineering practices. Archaeological evidence and inscriptions demonstrate systematic maintenance of roads, bridges, ports, and fortifications, ensuring connectivity, trade, and military logistics. Constantinople's Theodosian walls, completed in the 5th century, allowed urban defense for nearly a millennium, illustrating continuity in engineering knowledge, urban planning, and state organization. Urban centers facilitated administration, commerce, and cultural exchange, serving as nodes for maintaining imperial authority across changing political landscapes. Economic structures reflected continuity in taxation, resource management, and trade networks. Early Roman fiscal systems relied on census assessments, poll taxes, and tributes from conquered territories. Under the Principate and late Empire, these systems became increasingly formalized, integrating provincial tax collectors, bureaucrats, and inspectors. Surviving papyri, inscriptions, and fiscal records show detailed accounting for land, trade, and urban commerce. In the Byzantine period, tax collection, market regulation, and maritime trade monitoring preserved this structure, providing revenue to support the army, civil administration, and urban provisioning despite territorial contraction and external pressures. Religious institutions exemplify another vector of continuity, particularly the integration of Christianity into state structures. Constantine's legalization and support of Christianity in the 4th century AD transformed the Roman state into a Christian empire, yet maintained administrative continuity through diocesan structures, episcopal networks, and coordinated urban governance. Subsequent emperors, from Theodosius I through Justinian I, codified orthodoxy, regulated church property, and coordinated councils to enforce doctrinal uniformity. Letters, council records, and imperial edicts demonstrate that bishops functioned as local administrators, legal authorities, and social managers, ensuring administrative stability even during periods of military threat or political crisis. This ecclesiastical infrastructure persisted throughout the Palaiologan period, providing continuity of record-keeping, governance, and legal administration even as imperial territory diminished. Roman military doctrine and strategic thought continued to influence governance and warfare after 1453 AD. Tactics, fortification design, army organization, and logistical planning employed in the Byzantine Empire were transmitted through military manuals, training methods, and administrative treatises. Ottoman military engineers and administrators adopted and adapted Roman and Byzantine fortification techniques, particularly in artillery-based siege warfare. Similarly, Western European states incorporated Roman law, administrative organization, and military precedent into developing political structures, illustrating the diffusion of Roman institutional knowledge beyond the empire's formal borders. Education, literature, and scholarship also reflect Rome's enduring legacy. From Republican rhetoric, historiography, and legal scholarship to Byzantine historical chronicles, philosophical treatises, and theological works, knowledge transmission preserved Roman language, literary style, and bureaucratic methodology. Manuscripts copied in Constantinople, Thessalonica, and Trebizond ensured the survival of classical texts, Roman legal commentary, and administrative manuals. Letters, codices, and chronicles from the 6th through 15th centuries confirm the continuation of intellectual traditions, the standardization of administrative literacy, and the teaching of Roman governance and law across successive generations. Finally, the survival of the Eastern Roman Empire, alongside successor states and ecclesiastical networks, demonstrates that Rome's influence extended far beyond territorial limits. Roman law, imperial governance, military organization, urban planning, and ecclesiastical coordination influenced the formation of early modern states in Europe, the legal codifications of Western Europe, the Orthodox Church organization, and the administrative practices of successor polities in the Balkans and Anatolia. The unbroken sequence from 753 BC to 1453 AD establishes Rome not as a transient empire, but as a civilizational framework whose structures endured and adapted for over 2,200 years, providing a coherent model for governance, law, military organization, urban development, and cultural continuity. In conclusion, the legacy of Rome encompasses institutional continuity, legal codification, military organization, urban infrastructure, economic administration, and religious integration. From hilltop settlements to the reconquered territories of Justinian, to the enduring Byzantine administration until 1453 AD, The Roman state maintained a continuous identity, preserving the principles of governance, law, and military strategy that underpinned Western and Mediterranean civilizations. Surviving records, including inscriptions, codices, fiscal documents, military treatises, and ecclesiastical correspondence, demonstrate the consistent application of Roman structures over centuries. Rome's legacy is thus both practical and structural, providing the administrative, legal, and military foundations upon which subsequent European and Mediterranean societies were constructed. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 AD marked the end of Roman political authority, but the institutions, law, infrastructure, and organizational principles of Rome continued to influence civilizations for centuries, completing a continuous historical trajectory from 753 BC to 1453 AD. Rome's history spans over 2 millennia, beginning as a settlement on the Palatine Hill in 753 BC, evolving through monarchy, republic, empire, and ultimately the Byzantine continuation in the east until 1453 AD. From its earliest days, Rome developed political institutions, social structures, and administrative frameworks that laid the foundation for its enduring influence. The monarchy established early governance and societal organization, while the republic codified law, extended citizenship, and expanded territory across Italy, preparing the city for Mediterranean engagement. Legal codifications, such as the Law of the 12 Tables, and institutional innovations, including the Senate, magistracies, and citizen armies, demonstrated Rome's capacity for structured governance and societal regulation. As Rome extended its reach beyond Italy, the Punic Wars, 264 to 146 BC, solidified its position as a Mediterranean power. Conquests of Sicily, Spain, North Africa, and the eventual destruction of Carthage marked Rome's transformation from a regional to a continental power. Expansion created wealth, social tensions, and new administrative demands, prompting military reforms and political adaptation. Civil wars, such as those following Marius, Sulla, and Caesar, reflected the challenges of balancing personal ambition, military authority, and governance. Yet these crises ultimately led to structural evolution, culminating in the establishment of the Principate under Augustus, 27 BC, which centralized power while preserving republican forms and institutional continuity. The early empire, through the Pax Romana, extended Roman influence across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Emperors codified law, standardized administration, built infrastructure, and managed vast military forces. Urban centers, trade networks, and cultural production flourished, demonstrating Rome's capacity for sustained governance and integration of diverse populations. Even during periods of instability, such as the crisis of the 3rd century, reforms by emperors like Diocletian restored order, reorganized provinces, and codified taxation and military administration, preserving the empire's structural continuity. The late empire witnessed the rise of Christianity, imperial reorganization, and repeated incursions by external groups. Constantine the Great legalized Christianity, established Constantinople, and reinforced administrative and military frameworks that endured even as the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. The survival of the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, ensured that Roman law, governance, military organization, and cultural identity persisted. Emperors such as Justinian I codified law, reclaimed former territories, and oversaw monumental construction, demonstrating both administrative capacity and continuity of Roman legal and bureaucratic systems. During the early Byzantine period, 476 to 1025 AD, the empire maintained provincial administration, military organization, economic integration, and religious coordination. Strategic fortifications, urban infrastructure, and fiscal systems ensured resilience in the face of external threats from Persians, Arabs, Slavs, and nomadic groups. Legal codification, bureaucratic continuity, and religious administration reinforced imperial authority and maintained social order. Even during crises, such as the Latin occupation of Constantinople, 1204 to 1261 AD, successor states preserved Roman governance, ecclesiastical structures, and administrative traditions, enabling the eventual restoration of Byzantine authority. The late Byzantine period, 1025 to 1453 AD, reflected continued adaptation and resilience. Territorial losses, succession crises, military pressures, and economic contraction challenged the empire, but institutional frameworks, military, administrative, fiscal, legal, and ecclesiastical, persisted. The Palaiologan emperors maintained governance, provincial control, and fiscal administration despite Ottoman expansion and repeated conflicts with Western European powers. Constantinople's defenses and urban infrastructure enabled the city to endure as the administrative and cultural center of the Roman state until 1453 AD, when Ottoman forces finally captured the city. Across these centuries, Rome's institutions, law, military organization, urban planning, economic systems, and religious structures endured and adapted to new contexts. Legal frameworks such as the Corpus Juris Civilis, military structures from legions to thematic armies, bureaucratic offices, urban networks, and ecclesiastical administration provided continuity, linking Republican and Imperial Rome to the Byzantine Empire. Even after the political end of Rome, these structures influenced the development of European legal systems, state governance, military organization, and urban administration. From its hilltop settlement to the fall of Constantinople, Rome's history demonstrates the persistence of institutional innovation, legal codification, administrative efficiency, and cultural integration. Rome was not merely an empire of conquest and territory. It was a civilization that preserved governance, law, urban planning, and military organization across centuries. The continuity of the Roman state from 753 BC to 1453 AD establishes a framework that shaped medieval, Renaissance, and modern European and Mediterranean civilizations. Rome's enduring legacy is evident in law, governance, military strategy, urban design, and religious organization, forming the foundation for successive generations of states and societies long after its political structures ceased to exist. In sum, Rome's trajectory, from monarchical beginnings, republican innovation, imperial expansion, crisis and reform, Western collapse, Byzantine endurance, to eventual fall in 1453 AD, reveals a civilization defined by continuity, adaptation, and enduring institutional structures. The 2,000-year span of Roman history demonstrates that Rome was more than an empire. It was a continuous civilizational framework whose administrative, legal, military, and cultural innovations shaped the trajectory of the Western and Mediterranean worlds, providing a legacy that endured well beyond the fall of Constantinople.